Good evening. It is Tuesday, August the 13th, and welcome to week 2 of Introduction to Criminal Law. And I'm Professor Richard Wright. That many of you know me already, but if you didn't, you were introduced to me this past week. So last week we had a very detailed lecture, and today will not be as detailed as will our lectures. And as I said before, that the lectures will take place every Tuesday now. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm going to scroll down because I covered all this information. Remind you again that your rubrics are included in each written assignment, which we're going to go over today. And then your discussion posts, I went over those requirements as well. Remind you that your live lectures, the link is given, but if you're going to see the recording, don't use that. I will be posting week 2 lecture at the conclusion of this. So remember, all lectures will take place Tuesday, beginning today, 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. You must attend the live lecture or listen to the archive. Each week there will be a keyword or phrase given, and you'll be required to provide that if you do not attend, or even if you attend, because I can keep record of attendance, and you'll get your points assuming you gave me the right phrase. So let's go over to the other side. We are now at week 2. So let's see the lecture for this week. Crimes against property will be presented. And you would read chapters 3, 4, and 12 of your textbook. I provided you the PowerPoints. When I first sent them out, I sent them out saying week 7, but I corrected that. Obviously, you should know there is no week 7 in this course. Week 6 is the last week. So actually, these PowerPoints that were sent out were for week 2 and include chapters 3, 4, and 12 that coincide with the textbook, A Brief Introduction to Criminal Law. And then look at the activities. What are crimes against property, larceny, robbery or burglary, misappropriation, trespassing, and vandalism. Some key terms that you need to study and for practice, and then a practice quiz as well. As you know, your first quiz will be next week, and that'll be your midterm. So that will be due next week, not this week. Your discussion assignment, robbery, burglary, and theft. Many of you have honed in on that, and you know that your initial post is due tonight at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and that your reply post is due Saturday. And then your written assignment, the identity theft problem, is due by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And you know what my motto is all about. So let's take a quick look at the course calendar. Course calendar tells you where we are here. Today is the 13th. Tells you your reading assignment if you click on that, and it tells you the things that I just talked about a minute ago. It tells you your initial post. Click on that, and it tells you your live lecture. Again, the link to reach me is also given in here. There it is right here as well. And then your reply post is due Saturday. And then your written assignment is due, and the details are found in the rubric and in the module. And then I have one of these checks this was second one, I believe, is the due date for the key phrase or word. Okay, and that's the calendar. Okay, you have that calendar. I showed you last week where you will find that calendar. All right, so now let's go and look at the module. Let's start by looking at the assignments for the week. The discussion post, and you use this scenario, and then your initial post, and then your reply post, and then your written assignment. Now, your written assignment, this is a two-part assignment, which means you have to do both parts to get the points. In the first part, you're going to examine the types of crimes that are committed based on this scenario. And you're going to have to address the following issues. Notice that if you use your textbook or outside sources, make sure you have a reference page and citations in the body. Okay, very, very, very important. Not just a citation, but citations in the body. Remember, I've stated before, citations provide support for the statements contained in your papers. So be sure that you cite these sources. And so you're going to go through each of these 4 elements, and you're going to make sure that you have satisfied those in a 2-page paper, double-spaced, Roman 12, and again, with a cover page and with a reference page. APA requirements satisfied. We discussed APA requirements last week, but you can always find information about that as well. Okay, and then you're going to create a flyer. There is a template for you to use to help you to create it. It says you can create it from scratch using Microsoft Word or Publisher, or you can use the template as a starting point. So you don't have to, but it's up to you. And so what you're going to do in your flyer is complete these 3 requirements. Now, once again, to help you with your assignments, there is the guide. I told you about that. That deals with the weekly assignment. It tells you online library where you can find credible sources, APA if you need to be brushing up on that, and then tutoring and writing lab if you need that. I've already talked to you about that. Now you can put these 2 items together in a zip, or you can attach them to one assignment. Try not to do what some students have done, assignment 1, and then submit it with a second attempt. Don't do that. Put it all in one so that you can make sure that as I grade it, all right? So otherwise, I'm going to have to make comments twice on the same assignment. And so how you do zip files, this tells you how to do that. And then your live classroom. Now, let's go back. Again, remind you, when you do your assignment, this is how you do it. You click on the assignment, right? And then it tells you the due date, and it tells you to view the rubric to get the 40 points. All you have to do is look at it, and it tells you how to get most of your points. 15 points. This is the written portion. This is the written portion, okay? Then the flyer, you get 15 points, and it should be a minimum of 1 page length, okay? This should be a minimum of 2 pages, all right? And that's what you need to do. But that's where you find the rubric. The rubric is given to you right here. All you got to do is click on View Rubric. Somebody told me that students don't like to do that. Well, this is how it's going to be in your grade book. All right, so you want to see the rubric for your written assignment. And that should pretty much clear up that issue about what assignments are due this week. So now let's go to the lesson content. When we get to the lesson content, we deal with the issues. And we're going to talk about these crimes. Again, this tells you what your chapters you're supposed to read. Chapter 3, 4, It says beginning through the extortion section, and then chapter 12, identity theft section, only that section of chapter 12. And then we're going to talk about this in a minute, this, and this, and then I'll show you a little bit about the key terms and a practice quiz. All right, I've already talked to you about how those work. These are the assignments again: discussion and written assignment. Remember, they all require research. Research is very important, and you'll lose points if your sole source is your textbook and then your live classroom lecture. So what are crimes against property? Crimes against property fit a various categories, and people who commit crimes against property, generally their sentences aren't as severe as crimes against persons, as you'll discover when we cover that next week. But crimes against property are so on the rise, and the deal is to try not to hurt anybody, but to take something that doesn't belong to you, and what we call appropriate it to your own personal use. And so it involves loss of the property, and then we're going to talk about some of the crimes that get more serious. And you'll see that the crimes that receive a higher sentence are crimes against property that also put a person in harm's way of crime against the person itself, though they're still crimes against property. Now, I'd say this to you, and those of you who take the drugs and crime course, understand that people will oftentimes commit crimes against property to take those items, to sell those items, so that they can support their drug habits. And you have many individuals who are addicts and will commit these crimes to support those habits. But when there are crimes against property, as I try to tell people, if someone's going to jack your car or something of that nature, let them have the property. Property can be replaced, and most individuals carry property insurance to cover the losses. So, but you can still incur some kind of loss by deductible. But it is better to let it go than to jeopardize your life. So, and property crimes also, such as shoplifting, theft, and things that from stores, adversely affect the consumers themselves, because the costs of these are passed on. I have a student now. He's a loss prevention officer for Burlington Coat Factory, and he's shared with me some experiences. But what you should be aware of is that that job actually saves you money in the long run, because what happens is, as things are stolen and the company that owns them, or the owner, is not able to make a profit, they will increase the fee on other things, and as a result, the consumer ends up paying in the end. So we're going to talk about some of these crimes a little bit in detail, and some we'll just hit real quick. Now, let's start out by talking about larceny. Now, larceny itself, you don't see that term much anymore, because the term larceny now is the equivalent of theft. And theft is the taking of the property of another with intent to deprive them permanently of its use. That's basically theft. And depending on the value of that property will determine whether or not it is a felony or a misdemeanor, depending on the cost of that item itself. So at common law, before putting in the crimes into the statutes, larceny was just what I had said a few minutes ago. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail. Burglary and robbery. So now, how do you commit burglary? At common law, burglary was breaking in, entering into the residence of another to take property in the nighttime. It used to be nighttime because it was thought that that was the best time for people to commit crimes. And if you notice, the attire of most burglars that you have seen is black, and that's because they would blend in with the night. However, in our modern definition of burglary, burglary involves even committing that same crime during the daytime. So burglary is now a 24/7 crime. And also, you discover that it doesn't just apply to residences. It applies to vehicles. It applies to businesses as well. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. Robbery. Now, here's something that you need to be aware of about robbery. First of all, in order for a person to commit robbery, they must intend to deprive the person permanently of property by force or by threat of injury of the person, and it must be taken from the person of the individual. Okay? So in these crimes, robbery is considered very serious. You're going to hear me talk about armed robbery, where there's weapons used, and then you're going to talk about strong armed robbery, where something is taken from a person by force, and then you'll hear me talk about regular robbery itself. Misappropriation means very simply that something was intended to go one place, and you took it to another place. In other words, what you did was convert it to your use, or either, but the result is you deprive that person. Now, we'll talk about that more in detail in a minute as well. Trespassing, very simply, you've seen trespass signs. That very simply is entering the property of another without their consent. Usually in trespassing situations, there is a requirement that there be posted a sign saying no trespassing, no entry of this without permission of the owner of that property. Vandalism is very simply destroying or breaking the property of another, the personal property of another, such as maybe breaking I was going to say breaking a window, but that could be. But vandalism can be in the form of taking a hammer and smashing someone's car, hitting the car, denting the car, keying the car. You know what I mean by keying? When you take your key and you go across, that's a crime against. And notice all of these relate to the property. So now let's go into the variations more in detail. All right. Now, as I said, larceny was the unlawful taking of personal property of another with the intent to permanently deprive them of that property. And as I said today, it's known as theft. And then the value of the property determines whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony. For example, it states here in our little section here that for the state of Florida, if a person steals something valued at $2.99 or less, it's misdemeanor. But if it's 1 penny more, which means it's $300, then you will be convicted of a felony. And then it says, however, if someone steals something greater than $300 more, they may be convicted of a felony, or they may call that grand theft. And some of you are familiar with that term under the game grand theft auto. And what they're really saying is that the value is great, and therefore the sentence is a higher time. And I've already explained to you, and I'll say it again, that the difference in a misdemeanor and a felony, in a misdemeanor, you go to jail for less than a year. And if you go to jail or prison, should I say, more than a year, then you are probably going to end up in prison, or you'll be convicted of a crime that could send you to prison, and you could go for a year and above. All right. And so there's what we call petty and grand theft, and then included in theft is retail theft, which I've kind of talked to you about, auto theft, theft of telecommunications. You know what that is, right? Stealing cable and those kind of things, video and satellite and cable services. That is tapping into the system without paying for the services. Also, you get into larceny, we start talking about bootleg and things of that nature, which come in also under intangible property as well as tangible property. Intangible property is dealing with property such as video or satellite signals that are utilized without paying for it. So it's very, very, very important that you understand that. All right. And so we get down to the point that we deal with the large intangibles. That's when we start getting into automobile theft. And that's usually where you get to the grand theft. And individuals know, as you should be aware, is that you keep insurance so that if your car is stolen after the deductible, you can at least get some recovery for it, because as stated here, many of the vehicles that are taken and stolen end up in what we call chop shops, where the parts are sold. There you'll find those in those part yards, junk yards, as some people used to call them, but they're not really junk yards anymore. They're more parts of vehicles and things like that, as far as even tires, rims, alternators, transmissions, even the gas tanks themselves as well. But there's other things as well. So anyway, one of the things that is very serious when we start talking about stolen vehicles involves the thing that takes place when sometimes a person is trying to get away from the police, and then people are hurt and injured or killed by those individuals trying to get away. Keeping in mind that those individuals are not trying to hurt anybody, but the police can, in a high-speed chase, hurt people and kill people, as well as the individuals themselves. And you know, so it says here that some vehicles may be stolen from a driveway where the keys were left in it, or being warmed up on a cold day. People do that a whole lot. What you need to do in that situation is hopefully have a second set of keys and be able to lock the car. And you want to make sure that only you can get that car and drive it away. But then there's the carjack, and as I said before earlier, that there are people who will pull weapons on you, or guns especially, and the glass is not going to stop the bullet unless you have bulletproof glass, but not most cars have that. Then my advice to people is give up the keys and let them go, because again, you will be able to live to report it. In a situation where you try to fight them off, oftentimes it ends up in them getting the vehicle, but it also ends up in someone seriously injured and or death. And so these little things here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over these because the fact that they all are categories that deal with vehicles. And joyriding, just to mention, is basically what it says here, taking the vehicle, but you don't intend to permanently deprive the individual, but when the person takes the vehicle without consent and uses the vehicle without their consent, it's considered as joyriding. Okay, we already talked about carjacking, and then there's references for that as well. All right, so that's it about theft and larceny. Larceny is theft. So now let's talk about burglary or robbery. First of all, as I said earlier, that sometimes burglary and robbery are used interchangeably, but there are two different crimes. As I said earlier, burglary was defined as breaking and entering of the dwelling with the intent to steal or commit another crime, such as vandalism or arson. At common law, I said this, that was intended to a home and occurred in the nighttime. But as I said earlier, today burglary occurs 24/7. It doesn't just have to be in the nighttime. And I said it had to be a residence, but now it extends to vehicles, businesses, other vessels like boats and things of that nature where people actually rest. Now, let me say this to you about burglary. There is some thought that if a person, for example, as we have in a scenario that we're dealing with today, sees an open window and reaches inside that window, is that burglary or is that theft? Is it burglary or is it theft? The answer is very simple. If an individual breaks the plane of a person's residence, business, vehicle, reaching even into an open window, then what you have done is it's been considered as breaking and entering, because a lot of people think breaking and entering means that the body physically has to go in. But even an item as small as this right here in my hand, a pen, that I reach in through the window and grab something, then I have violated the plane and could be guilty of burglary. The purpose for that burglary is to protect individuals in their homes so that people can feel secure in their homes, and that oftentimes you should be aware that burglary is intended not to come across anybody. Burglary is intended to simply get the property without even coming in contact with anybody. That's why there's something else called strong arm or home invasion, should I say, that we talk about as well. But burglary in itself can be as simple as reaching in and grabbing something. Somebody said, well, people shouldn't leave their windows open. Well, people shouldn't be reaching into other people's stuff anyway. And so that's the point. So be aware of that as you think about your assignment. Think about, and it makes a lot of sense when you begin to think about it. So now let's talk about whether a person commits robbery. Now, robbery is like theft or larceny, as I described earlier, the unlawful taking of personal property of another with the intent to permanently deprive the person of the property. Now, that sounds just like theft, but robbery has two other important elements that distinguish it and take it beyond theft or larceny. The taking must be from a person or from that person. And it didn't say or, and the taking must be done by the use of force, intimidation, threat, or violence. That's the way it has to be. Now, that doesn't mean that just because you come and you see the person taking something, then in that instance that it's considered robbery because you see them. But it's not taken from your person by force, intimidation, threat. Now, it could be that what happens is the person starts to take it, and then you try to stop them, and then they take it by force from you, or intimidation from you as a person. Then, in that case, that's where we get into it, and we're gonna specifically deal with armed robbery, strong armed robbery, and home invasion robbery, as I was talking about a few minutes ago. So, therefore, you cannot use that term for theft. It does not fit because it missed those two elements. And you should be aware that your sentence is generally more. And you know why? Because of something that I said earlier. Because now you're committing a crime where the person is involved, and the person becomes part of the target, though the actual goal is not to intimidate or hurt that person. Your goal as the robber is to get whatever it is that you're seeking to get during the robbery, whether it's money or either whatever it is, okay, some form of property. So now let's talk about armed robbery for a minute here. Very simple. Here's a good example. Gun, knife. The point of the matter is you use a weapon, okay? Now, it says, if a suspect used a pen concealed inside his jacket and pointed it to the victim to make it appear to be a concealed gun and says, give me your wallet, this is armed robbery because the individual does not know what that is. Now, let me ask you this question. Is pickpocketing robbery or theft? Type in which one you think it is. Which one? Type it in the chat box and I'll see it. Is pickpocketing theft or is it robbery? Which one is it? Yep, you're on it. It's definitely theft. And the reason why it's theft is because while it's from the person of the person, but remember, and it says, doesn't say or, must be done with the use of force, intimidation, threat, or violence. Pickpockets don't operate like that. Pickpockets operate on the basis of taking things without the person knowing it. So that's a good call. Good call. You hit it right on the head. Absolutely. So we get to armed robbery. Now let's talk about the next. Let's talk about strong armed robbery. So strong armed robbery is similar to robbery. Listen to this one now. Get this one. Except no weapon is used. So what do you mean? Wait a minute. How can you do that? Here's an example here. A 25-year-old woman is jogging. She has a small purse which contains her identification and money. A 17-year-old boy runs up behind her, rips the wristlet away from the victim, and runs off with it. Because then it's by force, threat, or intimidation. And you can see it right here in the picture. So it doesn't necessarily involve a weapon. And so because no weapon was displayed, but force was used, so the key thing is force, then the crime is considered strong armed robbery. So you got to remember that. Strong armed robbery. Now, in order to, again, back to the pickpocket thing. Again, the difference between trying to take somebody's purse, that person is aware of that and tries to maybe resist or hold it, and then you snatch it and go. Or you cut it off the shoulder and go. The key thing is that is what it's called. Okay, so that's strong arm robbery. If it's a weapon involved, it's going to go back to armed robbery. And the last one in that area is what I talked about earlier. Is home invasion. Now you see this person's in the bed. Another form of robbery. It's like burglary, but it's more serious. Remember I said when you start to get closer to hurting someone, then it gets to be more serious. It says similar to burglary, doing a home invasion robbery, an offender enters without consent, but uses force to commit a robbery of the occupants. For example, according to Florida law, the elements are intentionally entering the dwelling of another without consent, and then commits robbery of the occupants in there. And that's it right there. So you got those now, okay? All right. So I wanted to make sure you got that. So now let's talk about misappropriation. So now we start talking about misappropriation. Misappropriation, you're kind of moving towards closer to what we call white-collar crimes, but they're not white-collar crimes, but they're properties that can adversely affect a person from having property that they worked for or that belonged to them taken. And so it says misappropriation is similar to theft, but it don't require the individual to carry away a person's property. Identity theft fits in the broad rule of misappropriation. Embezzlement, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, where a person is entrusted with money or property and they convert it to their own use, those kind of things. But it says here that in the misappropriation, where someone once legally was in possession of the property, converts it unlawfully to personal gain, and can embezzlement, fraud, forgery, welfare fraud, identity theft, and credit card crimes. So we're going to just quickly just go through these. Embezzlement, I've already talked about that. Fraud, well, you know where, for example, forgery, welfare fraud, identity theft, and credit card fraud. The fraud also takes place, like for example, here's what happened to me just recently. I was away on a trip in Florida, and when I was in Florida, I had my card with me, and I got a notice that was sent to me by the bank telling me that they wanted me to, they froze my card because I was going to use it at a Walmart down in Orlando. But I had to call them to verify some transactions. And so they mentioned several transactions, and I said, yep, I did those. And then they mentioned 2 other transactions that were big amounts. And they said, did you do these? I said, I did not. But what they did was, because thank God I had less than the amount of those, well, I didn't have less than the amount of one of them, but the big one, I had less than the amount, and it looked kind of fishy. So I told them no. So they said, okay, we're going to freeze that account. No, we're not freeze the account. What we're going to do is we're going to close that card out, because they were not using checks. They were using my debit card to the account. And so then, fortunately, I had another account that I could transfer it to and use another debit card. But fraud is as simple as that. You don't have to lose your card. You don't have to give anybody your card and then they take it. There are all kinds of ways that they can get it thanks to the internet. I remember some years ago when I was the victim of about nearly $3,000, and it was identity theft and credit card fraud contained together, where my wife and I went to a restaurant over the weekend to you know, in an Orland Park area in Illinois, and we bought, you know, we went to eat and so forth. And what do you do normally? You give your waiter or waitress your card, and then they bring you back the bill with your card and so forth. Okay, so that was fine. So we went along until that Monday when I got ready to get some gas, and I used my card, the very same card that I had given this person. They said it was declined. So I called the bank, and the bank said that this card was used to try to make purchases, no, to make purchases in Ohio, but I was in Illinois. And it was like $3,000, and it was quite a bit of money in the account at that time. So what happened is that when I ended up using my wife's card to pay for my gas. Then the next day I went to the bank, and that's when I discovered what happened. Well, the bank put my money back provisionally while they conducted an investigation. Some weeks passed, and one day I was in the bank, and my banker, she calls me over, and she says, we know what happened. She said that the person that was the waiter was part of a ring, and not only did they swipe my card for my charge at the restaurant, but they took it and ran it through a jump drive and appropriated and sent it by computer to Ohio, and somebody made a card from that. And it's as simple as that. I recently had a situation where I went to get a cell phone for my daughter with AT&T. And when I went to get the cell phone for AT&T, they said I owed them some money for a cell phone that I didn't pay for. I says, no. I said, I have AT&T already at my home phone, and, you know, a triple package. So anyway, they came back with the information, and they said, this is the address where it was applied from. I says, oh my God. This was in 2018. I says, I moved away from that house and sold that house in 2011 and lived two other places since that time to where I'm living now. Well, long story short is that someone had gotten the information, applied for it, and the package was delivered to that house. Now, we don't know if it were the people that we sold the house to who still have it, or either someone who got the information and then got it off of the porch. But anyway, the point of the matter is that it took almost a month and a half to 2 months to get even that straightened out. So fraud can create very serious problems as far as, and I'm sure all of you in this class neither know someone or yourself have been the victim of that. Forgery is very simply altering the document that's written for $10 and you put an extra zero in there for $100. Welfare fraud is lying on your welfare, your public aid application, like saying that you don't work, or either not providing correct income information to get assistance, whether it's energy assistance, renter's assistance, or either what they call link. Okay, and then identity theft, we've talked about that quite a bit. Talking about identity theft one more time, I recently had a person who I knew that worked for the college, and I got an email that I thought was from that person. And it was the college email. You know, you have your S-mail, but this we have as professors and staff members, our same email at the beginning, our first name dot last name, and then if there's somebody else who has the same name, then they'll put a 1 or a 2. Anyway, at Rasmussen.edu. And we don't have S-mail because S-mail stands for student mail, as you students have that in front of Rasmussen.edu. Well, I got this email, and this person invited me to be a personal shopper. And so I knew. I called someone, and they said, yes, they do work for the school and so forth, and the email. Long story short is that I contacted them back and said, let me know what the next step is. And so then I started getting stuff in the mail. And I got in the mail something, some checks that were literally $18.50, and they wanted me to take these checks, put them in my account, and then buy Walmart gift cards, use those gift cards. No, don't use them. Send them the card numbers, and they would use them and so forth. Well, as it was, the check was very real, and I said, no, this is not right. So I contacted the postal inspector because it came through the mail. I contacted the local law enforcement agency who told me what to do, as well as the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And sure enough, it was a scheme. And by the way, the person, when I finally reached them, who actually supposedly sent this out, here's what happened. The way it happened, I was in a professional development session, and I saw them in there, and I shot them a message privately because it was in WebEx. It says, could you call me after this is over, please? And the person did, and then we had the conversation, and the person told me that that she had some problems in her email, her college email, and it had gotten hacked. So what I'm saying, we get these things all the time. We change our passwords frequently through our school to protect us, but they still continue to happen. Credit card fraud, I've told you already about that. Even if you have your PIN and all that, trust me. And then you guys know about this too, right? That if you use your card at the, like for example, it's a debit card, you use it at the bank for an ATM, or if you use it to pay for gasoline, you have to be careful because of the fact that there's now this I forget what they call it. Anyway, they can put a fake thing on top of the actual bank thing where you put your card in to get your money out. And what this does is it retrieves your information. You're getting gas and stuff like that. So what I do is whenever I go to either a gas pump or either ATM, even if it's my own bank's ATM, I mean, if it's outside, I'm not talking about, there's some that are in the lobby at the bank that I go to, but here's my point, is that you can put your hand on it, and if you can try to pull it, and if it comes loose, then you take it in to whoever it is, whether it's the gas station or either the bank. And what happens is that these people put these things on top of there, and then they let them sit for so long, then they come back and take them, and then they do the same thing with that jump drive that I had, and they will take your information and appropriate it. So these are just some of the things that happen. So now let's get to trespassing. Trespassing is very simply entering crime, entering the property of another, land, structure, home, vehicle, so forth, without their permission. And then usually for private property, you'll see a sign similar to this that says trespassers will be prosecuted. Vandalism, finally, is intentionally damaging the property of another. And, I was talking about earlier, such as keying somebody's car, pouring paint, or doing something to mess the vehicle up. Let's say forcing you to snatch your phone and then drop your phone, and then or you become involved in a motor vehicle crash, or intentionally damaging the property of another. the end result is property damage. But the manner in which the property is damaged determines if it's a criminal law violation. Just remember, if it's intentional, that's the key. That's the key. And then the last thing I want to say, and to talk about criminal damage to property, is given an example that if, for example, you drive through and you're involved in an accident, then we're going to deal with a civil suit. If a person drove through a red light and collided with that person, then there could be a violation. But criminal damage to property occurs when the property of another is intentionally damaged. Let's say you take your car and you ram your car into someone. My son recently had someone to ram the back of his car and then take off. He didn't get their plate or none of that stuff, but that person could have been charged with criminal damage to property. So anyway, those are the things that we deal with when we start talking about property crimes. And I hope that you understand that the key thing with property crimes is that the individuals are not generally interested in coming in contact with people unless you start talking about strong arm robbery, unless you start talking about robbery. But generally you talk about burglary or theft, credit card, and all that other kind of stuff that we've talked about. Everything else pretty much involves an individual or groups who are trying to get money for something. Bootleg is also theft. Did you not know, speaking of theft, dealing with retail theft, and I had a young lady as I represented who got caught in this some years ago at a school. She was in college. That changing the tag, if the tag says $10 and you change it to a $5 tag or something else. Now, it's harder to do that now. You know why? Because of the scanning of the items. However, though, back in the times when this happened, a person can put a tag on there and find themselves dealing with it. Now, I also know of a case of individuals who had a ring, and what they would do, and I don't mean a ring like the kind you put on your finger, but they were a group of people, and what they would do is they'd have these little stickers that had like clearance or something on it, and the price was very low. And what they would do is they would put that on things, and then they would take them to the register, and then the clerk would look at it and say, oh, okay, and then they would change what the system would say and put it in the clearance. Well, that is theft. That's theft. That's theft of property. And so the young lady that I was representing, she wasn't aware that her friends were doing that, and I was able to get her acquitted. But the individuals who were doing that, and it was on video, they caught them on video camera changing it and those kinds of things. So the key thing is if you're not paying for something that you're supposed to pay the right amount, then that kind of thing. There are times too when people go in and they'll buy things and they know that the company will give them a break if there's something wrong with the item, like maybe a small tear or either something that they'll do, sometimes a little spot. There have been people who have actually been caught on camera doing that and then trying to get them to reduce. That too is theft as well. Another example of theft is if your cable, gas, light, water are shut off for non-payment and you go and you turn it back on. That is theft of services. And so you can be charged with a property crime for those kinds of things. So the key thing to remember, people, is that if you know, and you do know, what you're doing, that you are trying to get over on somebody in terms of acquiring control, whether paying partially for it or not, then you can be guilty of that. Now, that's different. For example, if you find yourself in a situation like in a restaurant and you say, for example, I like my steak a certain way, and if the steak's not the right way, then I'll tell them, hey, up front, I told you how I wanted it, and then they will come back, and the manager will come back and say, okay, we'll make you another one, and we will take it off the bill. This is not a routine or scheme. It's just that how you like your steak or how you like it. But it would be different if you go in there asking for a certain way and as a pattern of practice, then that gets to be a scheme. So anyway, the whole thing is this, good people. It's all about your approach and what you're actually doing there. Okay, we've got about 4 minutes left, but I want to take time to share with you again what I've said, these key terms, the practice, and then the quiz. But I want to again remind you, these are for your benefit. These are activities that can help you once you've done your reading, going through the lecture, and then I always tell people use the top one, the flashcards, and then if it comes on like that, just allow it. By the way, make sure you guys try to use Firefox, because that's the system that works best with Blackboard. So anyway, it might, okay, you'll have a scenario. The intentional altering, making, or authentication of the writing of another with the intent to defraud or harm another person. So now, you're not talking about physically hurting somebody. And so what is that called? You want to take a shot at it? Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The intentional damage without consent. Criminal damage to property. Okay. So you flip that card over, though, and that's forgery. That was the answer to the first one. It was forgery. All right. That's what I was looking for. Then the next one, the intentional damage to the property of another without consent. Flip the card over. Criminal damage to property. And then you go to the next one. Similar to armed robbery, except the act or robbery is committed without a weapon. Rather, robbery is committed by physical force. What do we call that? As soon as you hear committed by force, you should think in terms of strong armed robbery. That's what it is. So these are things that can help you to study. I only did 3 of the 15, so I'm going to go out of that right now so you see how that works. All right, so I'm going to close that down. And let's close that down right there. And then let's go back to the next thing. Okay, just about here. So some more practice. Which crime against property? Which crime is it? So now, this is an activity that you need to go over. Okay, I'm going to ask for an answer here. A 17-year-old boy is walking home from high school and is approached by 2 suspects. They shove him onto the ground and take his wallet. What type of crime is that? I'll put A, B, C, or D. You type in the letter. Yep. Absolutely. Very good. Okay, let's do one more. A 14-year-old girl left her bicycle, this is a tricky one here, outside on the front lawn. In the morning, the bicycle is missing, and the family reports the crime to police. What type of crime is this? Okay, let's see if you're right. You are. You know what most people do? They'll go for B or C, burglary, because they'll overthink it. But that's very good. You didn't get tricked, because the front, the bicycle is left outside. It's outside on the front lawn. Somebody might say, "Well, isn't that no? Burglary is actually not the land. Then there could be trespassing, but trespassing wasn't one of the choices. In the morning, it's missing." And for what type of crime they commit, they did not commit burglary. Absolutely. Now, if they had taken it from the garage, wouldn't that be burglary then? Yep, because then it's in a contained situation. Very good. Excellent. You got this one. Last one. A 25-year-old man is attending a party inside his friend's house. Okay? While inside, the man breaks into a locked bedroom and steals jewelry. The crime is discovered the next day, and the victim reports to police. What type of crime is this? A, B, C, or D? Okay. You said B? Did you say B? Did you say B? Okay. So you think that a 25-year-old man attending the party inside his friend's house, while he's there, he broke into a locked bedroom and stole the jewelry. You think he committed armed robbery? Okay, then it's not that. So what did he do? There it is right there. I just hit it for you. It's burglary because the man didn't have the permission to go inside the locked bedroom, even though he was invited in. See how you can get tricked by that? Now you say, "Oh, you're right." I said, "I know I'm right," because that's the way it is. But now, doesn't it make sense that that person should be charged with burglary because they broke into the locked bedroom? It was an area that he wasn't invited to for the party. Does that make sense? It does. Last one. A clerk working at a local gas station is approached by a masked man who points a gun at him and says, "Give me all the money in the till." The clerk does give it to him. The man leaves. The clerk calls the police report. What type of crime is this? A, B, C, or D? You say a strong arm robbery? Okay, let's try it. Nope. Because this is not strong arm robbery because the masked man pointed a gun at the clerk. If he had snatched it from him with the gun, then we might be talking about that. But it's armed because the person didn't necessarily know whether it was a real gun, whether the gun was loaded, or all of that. It placed him in fear or apprehension of injury. So they say you can try again. So anyway, if you do this one, then you'll get it right. There we go. So anyway, I'm going to stop because You see. But these are nice because they help you. And then what you have to do, guys, is not only read it and then get the right one. If you get the wrong one, it tells you get 3 tries. Well, you should always get it because it's only 4. But the point of the matter is that read carefully and think about the material that I lectured on as well as what's in there. And then the final thing, before I let you go, is this. Your practice quiz. I can't state how important this is. Don't forsake the other 2 though, because they help you as well. And so this is what they look like. You've already seen them, but well, you'll see the ones week 3 coming up, which will cover material from week 1, week 2, and week 3. The unlawful entry into the dwelling of another without consent with the intent to commit a robbery is known as what? A, B, C, or D? Okay. The key phrase that they added in here is unlawful entry without consent with the intent to commit a robbery. In order to commit a robbery, you have to place the person in fear or apprehension. Does burglary do that? No, but this does. All right, because it involves threat or violence. And so, one more time. What crime is committed when someone points a weapon at another person while they're on a sidewalk and demands that that person turn over personal property, such as a wallet? A, B, C, or D? You say strong arm robbery. I say A, armed robbery. Let's see who's right. I am. Because remember, it says they point a weapon and demand. So, by use of threat or force of a dangerous weapon. So it fits that. But strong arm robbery is if they, like the example of snatching the purse. That's strong arm robbery. All right. So anyway, I'm gonna adjourn with that, and I want you to give me the key phrase. Property crime. That's it. That's what I want you to give me for today. That's all we've been talking about. So I'm going to say good night. You know what to do as far as the assignments are concerned. If you have any questions, thank you for coming out. I wish more students would come out to the live because there are more things I could do. But, it's okay. For some people, they do not do it because they say, well, I can always look at the recording and I could speed through it to get to the key phrase. Well, that's an injustice to you. To be honest, it shows up in the grades. I tell you the truth, it does. Because I've had people that do things and then they'll come back and say, I didn't realize that. And I said, go back and listen to the lecture again. Not to be sarcastic, but I'm trying to get my students, and you know me because you've had me for other classes, is that I go over and break it down. I spend a lot of time, and then I'm available to answer questions. But when you jump out there and you try to shortcut the system, it comes back and bites you every time. And you guys spend too much money. And I already said, I produce educated, ethical professional criminal justice students. And, you know, because I'll be asked to write a letter for you. I just had a student today, and this student was going on to a master's program. And this student was in Introduction to Corrections, Introduction to Criminal Law, Drugs and Crime, and Contemporary Issues of Criminal Justice. And I went back and I looked at the work that that student did. And I was able to write a letter recommending that they be admitted. And those are the kind of things that I do. And I don't just say it, I do it. So, and then when it comes to employment situations as well. So anyway, good night. Have a good week. And I look forward to, again, next Tuesday when everybody would come to class. All right. Have a good one. Study hard.